Welcome to Crafting Without Permission. I'm your host, Griff Grayman. And this week, I'm going to take you on a little trip to Bonedust Canyon. A place like Bonedust Canyon's gotta be full of bones, right? So we're gonna make some simple scatter terrain here, some little bone piles. I'm going to make a variety of shapes, starting with some white Sculpey. I'm going to make just these very simple, iconic, almost cartoon-esque dog toy bone shapes. Make a pile of these, just as many as you can stand. You never know, you might use them for later projects. You can also make some skulls. I'm not going to worry terribly about proportion, making a perfect, anatomically realistic skull. I just don't have that skill level yet. Instead, I'm going to go for more of a stylized icon of a skull, just some simple eye holes, nostril holes, and some goofy looking teeth. When it comes to crafting and learning to build your skills, it's easy to make the mistake of only trying something when you have a very specific idea in mind, like skipping straight to trying to sculpt a miniature or a figurine when you don't really even have the basic skills figured out. So having projects like this is a great chance to build your skills and work on simpler shapes so that later on, when you have a really cool idea of something complicated to sculpt, you're a little bit more prepared to deliver on the concept. Once I'm done sculpting these pieces, they're going to go in the oven at 250 degrees for 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Small pieces like this, that'll be plenty of time. I would advise you to just take a big old hunk of Sculpey and make bones until there's no Sculpey left, and go ahead and just bake what you got and pick what you like out of what you made. I'm also going to use some small bits of coffee stirs split up as extra little jagged pieces, just a variety in texture. And I'm going to use my signature basing technique using some heavy cardstock. My favorite material is coasters from the bar, and a little bit of duct tape to add grip and stability at the bottom. Since we are going to have a limited amount of bone pieces, we're going to add a little volume to these by using hot glue and some debris. In this case, I've got little heavy beach rocks and some little bits of wood shavings and chips. Just something that can take on a texture later. We're also going to use a little bit of Uncle Jeremy's special black magic sauce. That's black paint and Mod Podge. And when it all dries, we'll glue our bits wherever we think is appropriate. I'll paint all this with a white base coat and then hit it with some washes and some weathering layers, and I'll use the same technique to make some bigger pieces and even some sand traps. We're going to use white Sculpey again to make some baby vultures, some baby dire vultures. If you've kind of boosted your confidence a little bit by doing some of those bone scraps, this is the next logical step, I'd say. A simple sort of squiggled shape with a conical beak, smooth on some bulbous eyes. Ooh, it's already looking like a nasty baby bird. I really like these silicone sculpting tools. They're really pliable and help you smooth stuff out. Having special tools is nice, but just remember you can do this shit with your thumbnail and your thumb. After we've got a few birds carved up, we'll fire them up in the oven, and then we'll add some base weight using some pennies so that they are less likely to tip over when you don't want them to. And when I make stuff out of Sculpey, I like to hit it with the thin layer of wood glue while it's still hot. I find that this really makes the models durable, and while they're still hot, they kind of soak up the wood glue. At least that's what I imagine. I'll hit them with some black acrylic paint, and then progressive layers of red, pink, purples. I'm trying to make the underlayer that the translucent, sickly looking skin is going to go on top of. At one stage I'll add some veins that we can see through the top layer of skin. And we'll hit this with some brown wash before adding further details and highlights. I'm going to use some black polyfill that I've spray painted to make the bodies. Just clump it around. You can kind of glue and shape it as you go and trim it if it's not the shape you like. We're going for that little sort of peep body shape. And we'll finish with a high gloss over the body to make them look kind of slimy. Baby birds gotta have a place to go, and dire vultures are gonna have a dire nest. So I'm just gonna use some twigs that I've cut into 2 or 3 inch sections and glue them in this reciprocating pattern. Here I've based them just on some cardboard, and I'm going to use wood glue to coat that surface, and then I'm going to follow up by packing in some decorative moss. This you can get at the dollar store. A little bit of joint compound will simulate the daubing, the muddy mix of saliva and chewed up vegetation that the dire vulture would have built this nest with. I'm also going to use some random skeleton pieces I've picked up over time at the dollar store. This one's got a nice jawbone, this one's got a few nice little limb pieces, because the dire vultures use the bones of their prey to help reinforce their nest. Once you got those all packed in, let it dry and paint it up, and you've got a great little home for your baby birds. Okay, so now we're going to make the big birds, the dire vultures. I've chosen a silhouette here that's intentionally fairly broad and ambiguous because I like to make a piece that I can hopefully use more than once. Now the baby vultures, those are pretty niche item there, but this we could use for giant eagles or thunderbirds or some sort of spiritual familiar type spell. But I'm just putting this cutout on some chipboard and using my scalpel to get some of the fine detail there. I'm wearing some protective Kevlar gloves here, but if you're careful, it's not necessary, and if you cut yourself, you'll be careful next time. Okay, so I'm gonna just take this 2D shape that I formed and give it some contour, give it some impression of a bird in flight, and it's not quite origami, but you can really get some interesting shape here. After I've got something interesting going on, I'm going to go ahead and use some craft glue to sort of reinforce and stiffen this piece. And of course, using a heat gun at a high setting at a proper distance can really speed things along. I actually did a couple different layers of Elmer's glue, and if you use your heat gun, you can get a partial set and then go in with a brush and add some texture. You see I've almost got some feather texture there. On the underside, I'm going to glue a small magnet and then use the super glue and baking soda technique to really harden it in there. And then at this stage, I'm ready to put some black magic sauce on there. And I'll be working in some feather textures when and where I can, and keeping in mind the directional angle of the feathers. Once I've got that set, I'm also going to use a small piece of dowel and some magnets in a base made in similar fashion as we've seen, to create this unique flying piece that implies birds of prey overhead. Okay, the missing final piece here is the broken rock piece. So we're going to take a thin piece of XPS foam, make a profile, irregular profile, and then break it up into these smaller jigsaw pieces. And keep track that you know how these fit back together as you're doing this. Once we've got that cool outline, we're going to come in and do a little additional weathering detail on the individual members here, adding some distress, some breakage, and some compression in areas. You just got to work with the foam to learn how it behaves in this regard. And to join the pieces back together, we're going to give them some bamboo skewer splints in between. I'm going to sharpen a double-ended piece of bamboo skewer, and then I'm going to spear each of these individual broken pieces and then further glue them together. You want to be careful that your glue is not too hot, or else it will melt the foam, but if that happens a little bit, we can make up for it later on. Don't worry, press forward. If our gaps are too big here, we're going to fill these with a little glue and some little shim rock pieces. And these can be cut down to size if you have them shooting out too far. Go ahead and texture it up and distress it in a way that fits your taste. And then we're going to seal it with some of that black magic sauce. Going for a pretty aggressive undercoat of color here, not even mixing these together, just some bright red, brown, and orange. Laying it on light so we keep some dark areas, keep that deep definition, and then follow up with some tans. This one a little more dry, somewhat covering up but wanting to retain some of that bold color underneath. And then when we're ready, we'll move on to a very dry white highlight coat to make everything really pop. This we're trying to mostly hit the edges, the real raised areas, the areas that are going to cause the most definition. And then we add a brown wash to finish everything off. And after that dries, we'll use some spray sealant to make it extra durable. You can use this same technique to create larger pieces that can act as walkways, mesas, or even entire boards. Beautiful.
After braving a harrowing switchback trail, your gang peers down upon a sunken courtyard, the secret entrance to Bonedust Canyon. A perilous descent awaits you, yet a nearby column of stone may offer a safer route. Trouble is, this natural stone ladder is home to a dire vulture nest filled with bald and repulsive hatchlings. Luckily, they appear recently fed and fast asleep. The ancient stone doors that seal the canyon's mouth have been worn smooth by wind and sand, and as the hot air stirs chalky dust into a frenzy, wings above eclipse the midday sun. The sandy ground is littered with cracked and sun-bleached piles of bones, some glittering with the temptation of treasures their owners may have left behind. The doors beckon, the shadows screech and circle overhead. The hatchlings sleep for now, but growing beasts are always hungry. You and your gang must find a way down to the courtyard and to open the massive gate without becoming the regurgitated breakfast of behemoth baby buzzards. The winds are rising. The fine dust chokes your breath and stings your eyes. What will you do?